What's up and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello! My name is Erica and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about all things Cassius Dio today. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. Cassius Dio is one of our very, very important sources on the late Roman Republic and early Roman Empire. And when it comes to Cassius Dio himself, because obviously today we are just going to be talking about who the man is behind the work, his birth date. It's one of the most hotly contested birth dates I think I've seen as a historian. To the point where if you say anything within like a 20-year sort of bracket, you're right. If you Google Cassius Dio's birth date, it will literally be anywhere between 150 AD up until 168 AD or CE, right? Depending on which categorization of the years you want to go with. And in fact, when you look at the published book of Cassius Dio, in the start of this, they don't have a birth date because it is one of those things where it's like, sure, anywhere within here, you're technically not wrong. My advice is that if you're just using these as like general knowledge, just kind of know that sort of date range and you're fine for his birth date. If, however, you were in a class, whatever your teacher says, whatever your professor says, just go with that. But just know that in the general history world, it is a very, very debated date. However, his birth date is pretty much agreed to be 235 AD or CE. Cassius was a Roman politician and historian, holding a number of offices with like super distinction. He's most famous for his 80-volume Roman history. The entire work, which obviously does not survive to us, followed Roman history from the city's foundation to the reign of Alexander Severus, which is from 222 even, CE to 235 CE. Only 1/3 of Cassius Dio's Roman history survives, and the best preserved bit is 69 BCE to 46 CE, but that's not the only part, so we do have little bits of Commodus and later emperors that do survive, but the best chunk is that period. Now, that part that talks about the later emperors, we do clump into this. Oftentimes, at least, if you're taking a course or if you're reading about Cassius Dio, we will clump it all together. But technically, these were first written before the Roman history were published as two short pieces. One of the rise of his close friend, Emperor Septimius Severus, and the second on the wars that followed the death of the much despised and absolutely hated Emperor Commodus, written in Attic Greek. The reason why we trust Cassius Dio so much is because not only was he very important in Roman politics, but also his father and his grandfather. So this is very much a classic rise to power in the ancient Roman world, something that I've referenced quite a bit on the channel that happens, and therefore it is important that we highlight with Cassius Dio, he is not making a name for himself, and it's not just his father that is a very important man, it is also his grandfather and his family before them that paved the way, so that when Cassius Dio comes into the world, he is coming after his father, who has held governorship all over the empire, including places like Lydia and Dalmatia. And Cassius Dio, when he moves to Rome to become a senator and to take over this role, it's a fairly easy adjustment, is what I'm trying to say. He ain't grinding for this role. He is pretty much handed it on a silver platter. He has a very bog standard and honestly quite boring rise to power. He has to go through all of the general, positions at the right time period. I now have uploaded, at the time this video comes out, I've now uploaded my Roman political system video to kind of explain that. So if you want more information of how he would have done that, you can just watch that video, because he very much did it very bog standardly, goes through all of the roles, gets praetor, and then ends up getting a consularship, or a consul position, is what I was trying to say. But why am I mentioning all of this if we're here to talk about his history of Rome? Reason being is because Cassius Dio uses these positions to gain access to all of the historical records. Obviously, as you should. Cassius Dio, though, has access to everything. So when he gets to the end of his career, he decides to research the history of Rome so that he can write a compilation of exactly what's gone on. And obviously not all of that is in here. This would be very underwhelming if this was everything. Because the Roman history at one point was 80 volumes long. And this took Cassius Dio around 10 to 12 years to research, and then another 10 to 12 years to actually write down. So that's why this is an incredibly important book, because he has access to everything. He takes a very long time to research everything, and he tries to write in as much detail as he possibly can in order to get this work published for us to then read. Well, okay, he wasn't thinking of like thousands of years to come. He was just thinking of the general public looking at this, and then he was thinking of probably a few years ahead. The idea that we are still reading this, he would have been chuffed. What survives to us of Cassius Dio's Roman history is one of the most integral parts of Roman history itself. So the parts that are passed down to us are specifically from the end of the Roman Republic through to the establishment of the empire. So specifically the years 69 BCE through to 46 CE are preserved in their entirety. And this is thanks to a bunch of later historians, obviously throughout history, that saw this and they were like, we need to make sure that of this integral period of history that this is preserved. What I'm trying to say is that if you're going to study Rome, if you're going to study Roman history, I have already done context episode of these general sweeps of Roman history, but when it comes to this very small period, in the grand scheme of things, obviously, you cannot escape Cassius Dio. He is unbelievably important because he was in the mix of everything when it came to the historical records. Obviously, he is existing much, much, much later in the AD CE period, but he's in the mix of all of the records that we do not have access to. And in saying that, that is one of the biggest complaints that historians, that modern writers, modern readers have of Cassius Dio, is that even though he had access to all of these incredible works, he is genuinely one of the worst sources you will ever see. This man will just write things and be like, well, I've seen in 3 different sources that this is written, and so therefore I'm going to repeat it. In fact, he makes this note in book 1. I'm not going to tell you too much detail, obviously, because then we don't have anything to talk about. But in the opening book, he actually writes that he was going through all of the sources and he was only going to include the things that popped up the most, because those were the ones that probably were true, as opposed to all of the crazy stories that he was reading. And so when he repeats stories and he's like, in 3 sources, I found this story about blah, 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 and he tells us this thing, he doesn't tell us where he got it from. Oh my God, it's so annoying. This is the complete opposite problem that we have with Diodorus Siculus, who is fantastic at sourcing. He'll be like, this person said this. Cassius Dio is like, just trust me. I did all the reading. Good lord, studying history is annoying. Even though he doesn't source, we can kind of figure out where he gets pieces of information from just based on how he's writing and what specifically the stories that we have, if those things have survived to us. And so we have to do a lot of the work with Cassius Dio when it comes to sourcing, which is not ideal. And when I say he has access to everything, he has access not only to the public documents that everybody else would have seen, things that were previously published to him, very famous authors, but he also had access to all of the private stuff, right? So that's the key, that he had both. He has literally everything. But with that being said, I should probably tell you what exactly is in the histories, because even though I've told you the date, what can you expect when you actually, I should probably hold it above the microphone, but what can you actually expect when you read this book? Now, this is a very bog standard history book, right? So this is telling us the movements, what's going on, etc., etc., between 69 BC or BCE and 46 AD or CE, right? So it's very bog standard in the way that it is structured. It's very normal. You can expect basically what you would have the idea of history. This is not a Herodotus, is what I'm trying to say. This is not a Suetonius. This is the thing that happened. This is where this is going, etc., etc. When Cassius Dio goes through Roman history, although he's trying to write a general history of movements, of people, and that sort of a thing, he obviously cannot avoid adding in at least a little bit of his personal opinion. This is what happens when you read history, that everything you have to read with a pinch of salt, because they will tell you their opinions of these historical figures. Now, they were historical to Cassius Dio as well, which is what I guess is good, that he's reading about these things in the sources, he's taking from the sources and then making his personal opinion based on those, which is essentially what we do. So us and Cassius Dio, we're all the same. And he really liked, for example, Augustus. He thought that Augustus was a really fantastic ruler, all of this kind of stuff. Says as well that Claudius, Emperor Claudius, who is the 4th emperor of Rome, also a great emperor. He really liked him, thought he was a great guy. Nero, not so much. Doesn't like Nero, also doesn't like Agrippina, his mother. So, you know, we do get a balance, is what I'm trying to tell you, of I like these people and I fucking hate these people. And of the bits that we have of Commodus as well, hates Commodus. Hates him a lot. But, with all that being said, that's all I really have to say of importance about Cassius Dio before we get into his works and before we look at what specifically he has written. So congratulations, you have heard something and learned something, hopefully, about Cassius Dio. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Obviously, after this episode, now that this has been published, there will, in the future, at some point, we'll start going into the works and exactly what Cassius Dio said. And I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.